As one organism eats another, energy and nutrients flow through the ecosystem. In this section, we are looking at trophic levels and energy flow. Energy flow is the transfer of energy from one organism to another in an ecosystem. Energy flow, or the flow of energy, is represented with arrows. So here we have an ecosystem. We have the initial source of energy, which is always the sun. Sunlight can be harnessed by plants, by producers, who can use the process of photosynthesis to turn the sun energy into chemical energy, a form of energy that they can store and that they can use. Energy flows from producers to consumers. Consumers will eventually die, and producers will eventually die, and their energy will flow to decomposers. Decomposers will break down the chemical bonds and return the nutrients that were contained in those organisms to the nutrient pool, and then those nutrients can be taken up again by producers. As one organism eats another, energy and nutrients flow through the system. It's important to realize that nutrients are always being recycled, and they're being recycled by a process called biodegradation. But energy is not recycled. Energy only flows in one direction. The biotic elements in an ecosystem fall into one of several levels. These levels are called trophic levels. So trophic levels are a way of describing living things based on their position in relation to the order of nutrient and energy transfers. This diagram here illustrates a simple food chain, and we're going to label the trophic levels. So the first trophic level is the producers. They're the first ones to have the energy, the usable energy. Producers are consumed by primary consumers, so they are the second trophic level. Primary consumers get eaten by secondary consumers, who are the third trophic level. And above them are tertiary consumers, which make up the fourth trophic level. You should notice in this diagram that the boxes representing each level are getting smaller and smaller as you go up. These boxes represent the amount of energy contained at each level. So as you get higher and higher in trophic levels, there's less and less energy. And this is because not all energy is passed on from one level to the next. Most of the energy, in fact, is lost. So these arrows I'm drawing sideways represent lost energy. Because so much energy is lost from level to level, and because the organisms get bigger as you go up the food chain, we usually cannot have more than 4 trophic levels. Flipping over the next page, we're going to look at the models that ecologists use to illustrate energy flow and to illustrate feeding relationships. And there are 3 different types. Starting with the simplest one, food chains. Food chains simply show the flow of energy. For example, starting with a producer, we could have grass. That'll flow to a primary consumer, such as a grasshopper. Energy will flow from the primary consumer to a secondary consumer, which in this case might be a bird, and can then flow to a tertiary consumer, which may be in this case a fox. That is an example of a food chain. Second level is something called a food web. And a food web are interconnected food chains. There's an example of a food web below, which we will get to in a second. The last model are food pyramids. And we're going to be looking at food pyramids more in 2.5, but for right now, we'll just say that food pyramids are models that show the loss of energy from one trophic level to the next. And approximately 80 to 90% of energy an organism takes in is lost. This means that ecosystems can support less organisms at higher trophic levels. This diagram here is of a food web, so it's showing many interconnected food chains, and the arrows point in the direction of energy flow. Food webs show the feeding relationships within a habitat. Examining the food web here, pause the video and try and answer these 3 questions. Okay, for a 3-step food chain, there's many possible answers, but one possible answer could be going plants to mice to hawks. There aren't as many choices for a 4-step food chain. I'm going to choose one that goes plants to the insects that eat plants, which are called herbivorous insects, to the birds that eat insects, which are called on this diagram insectivorous birds. And these birds may be eaten by owls. Some organisms fit into more than one trophic level. Examples of this on our food web are hawks and owls. The last model that we're going to look at is pyramids of energy. Pyramids of energy show the loss of energy between trophic levels, because the transfer of energy is never 100% efficient. Around 90% of energy is lost. So where does it go? Well, some of it is not ingested or eaten. So there's a lot of energy that's just not eaten. Some of it is not digested. So it's taken in, but it's not assimilated. Some of the energy is lost as heat, and some of the energy is excreted. Detrivores and decomposers feed at every trophic level. Detrivores recycle decomposing matter, and decomposers break down organic material.